This is day 2 of using the quadratic formula to solve equations, and the important thing to note, which I noted up on top of the page again, is that the solutions of the equation must be in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So you've got to have everything onto one side of the equation, and it's best to have it in the descending order from highest exponent down to the constant last. That way you can figure out your a, b, and c terms easier. So the first step here I'm going to do is move this 44 back to the other side, so I've got to subtract it. And when I do that, I've got the equation of x squared minus 7x minus 44 all equals 0. And so from that point we can figure out our a term, our b term, and our c term. And then from there we can go ahead and substitute into our formula. So we've got the opposite of b, so 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, and c is negative 44. And this is all over 2 times 1, 2 times a. So it's 7 plus or minus the square root, and then we've got 49 is what we get when we square the 7, and multiplying the 4 times the 44 gives me 176. Now note that two negative signs here are going to end up canceling each other, so I'm going to have a plus 176, and this is all over 2. So to do a little bit more work there underneath that radical sign, we can add some numbers together. So 49 plus the 176 gives me 225, and this is all over 2. So when we take the square root, it does go have a perfect square. It is a perfect square, so we go ahead and do that. We do get 15, and so 7 plus 15 over 2 is one of the problems. And I also have the 7 minus 15 all over the 2. So we go ahead and do some work there. First one ends up giving me 22 over 2, which makes 11. So that was one of the solutions. And the other one is going to end up being negative 8 over 2, which gives me negative 4. So negative 4 and 11 are the two x-intercepts. Well, taking a look at the next one, I have it already set equal to 0. So I've got my a term, b term, and c terms all ready to go. So I'm ready to write the equation. It goes negative b, so negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times a, which is 12, and c is negative 2. And this is all over 2 times by 12. Now we do some work there, and we end up with still having this negative 5 plus or minus the square root. We get 25 when we square the 5. And note the two signs here. The negative and the negative multiply to make a positive. 4 and 2 make 8 times 12 makes 96. This is all over 2 times 12 is 24. And so we're ready to add that 25 plus the 96, and that gives us 121. And this is still all over the 24. So we can take the square root of 121, so we end up with this negative 5 plus or minus 11 over 24. And then from there we just do negative 5 plus 11. Plus 11 all over 24, and we also have the negative 5 minus 11 all over 24. So we're ready to do some work there. 6/24 will reduce down to a 1/4. So that's that answer. And then over here we end up with negative 16 over 24, which have a common factor of 4. So we take that common factor of 4, actually 8. Let's take out the big number. Divided by 8, we end up with a negative 2 over 3. So 1/4 and negative 2/3 are the two x-intercepts. Taking a look at this next one's a little different because we are missing a term. No x term here. That's okay. That just means our b term is 0. So b equals 0 in this case. C is the negative 125. A is the number out in front of x squared, which is just 1 in this case. So it means that we have just the plus or minus, and the 0 squared won't do anything, so it's just negative 4ac that we're left with. So negative 4 times a, which is 1, times c is negative 225. And this is all over 2 times by 1. So we have to multiply the 4 times by 225, and we get 900. So plus or minus the square root of 900. Notice the negative signs will cancel in this case. It's all over 2. So we take the square root of 900, and we're left with plus or minus 15 over 2, which when we set up the two problems, we got 15 halves, and we also have, oops, not 15, let's fix that. I was thinking of the answer. So we take the square root, we end up with 30. So plus or minus 30 over 2. So we've got to do positive 30 over 2, and we have to do negative 30 over 2. And so when we come up with our two answers, we get 15 and negative 15, and those are the two x-intercepts. Well, last one here, we are going to start with figuring out our a, b, and c terms, which we have right there, and then just substitute them in. So negative 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 6 squared minus 4 times a, which is 8. C is negative 5, and this is all over 2 times 8. So we go ahead and do some more work there. We've got the negative 6 still to bring down, plus or minus the square root. And when we do this work, we got 36. Watch the signs here. 2 negatives multiply to make a positive, so it's a plus sign. So whenever a and c are opposite in sign, you're always going to have a plus sign here, because we always start with the minus 4. And so if a or c are negative, then we're going to have 2 negatives, which will make a plus sign. 4 times by 5 makes 20, times 8 makes 160. This is all over 16. So we have to add some numbers there. We've got 160 plus the 36 gives us 196. So we get negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 196 all over 16. Now, if I wasn't able to take the square root, I would just leave it like that for now. But I am. It makes 14. So negative 6 plus or minus 14 all over 16. So I got two problems to set up. Negative 6 plus 14 over 16, and I've got the negative 6 minus 14 all over 16. So I'm ready to solve here. I subtract those two numbers. I get 8/16, which reduces down to 1/2. Over on this side, I've got to add the two numbers because they're the same sign. Makes negative 20 over 16. Take out that common factor of 4, and we're left with a negative 5/4. And that would be our two x-intercepts. One more problem here. The height of a baseball can be modeled by the equation h equals, and then they give us some information. Remember, h stands for the height, t is time in seconds, and that's what they tell us here, since the ball was hit. And so 4 represents how high it was off the ground to start with. 70 is the amount of feet per second, the initial velocity, and the negative 16 has to deal with the half of the acceleration of gravity. Well, at this time, they want to know at what time will the ball be at 70 feet. Okay, so times. So there could be two answers. And the reason there could be two is because this is what the equation looks like. We got height here, and we got time on this side. And so it's starting 4 feet up, and it goes up into the air and comes back down. So most likely, 70 is going to be somewhere here. It could be right at the vertex, which would mean there's only one time. But if there's two, if it makes it past 70 feet, we would have a time going up and then a time coming back down. So we'd have two answers. So they should both be positive answers that we come up with when we solve this. So let's take a look at what we're going to do. First of all, I'm going to put the 70 feet in for h instead of 0, because it's not on the ground. We're not trying to find out when it hits the ground. We're trying to find out when it's at 70 feet. And so 70 equals negative 16t squared plus 70t, and then plus 4. And so I'm going to move that 70 back to the other side, so subtract it from all sides. So now I have this. 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 70t. And I've got a minus, and this makes 66. So you could take out a common factor, but if you've got a calculator, you could just leave these numbers the way they are and just deal with them. And again, the whole idea is when you're using the quadratic formula is to set it equal to 0. So if you've got a different height, just move it to the other side, just like I did there. So I'm going to use these numbers. A is 16, negative 16. B is 70, and C is negative 66. So big numbers. You want to use a calculator here. So negative 70 plus or minus the square root of 70 squared, and then minus 4 times a, which is negative 16, times by c, which is negative 66. This is all over 2 times a, which is negative 16. So we've got some work here. We've got this negative 70 plus or minus the square root. And then 7 times 7 makes 49, and just add 2 zeros, so I know that. Watch the signs here. Look, notice that everything's negative. 1, 2, 3 negatives. That makes a minus sign. Odd number of negatives makes a negative. Let's go ahead and use that calculator to multiply some of these numbers here. So 4 times 16, I know that's 64. So all I really have to do is 64 times by 66. And that gives me 4,224 all over negative 32. So I do that subtraction there. So I'm going to subtract that 4900. And this is what I've got now. I've got negative 70 plus or minus the square root of 676. 676, pretty sure that's a perfect square, but we'll find out shortly here. And so this is over negative 32. So 676, take the square root, and it is. It's 26. So negative 70 plus or minus 26 all over negative 32. So we've got two problems to set up here. We've got the negative 70, and it's plus 26 all over negative 32. And you also have the negative 70 minus 26 all over negative 32. So both numbers on top and bottom are going to be negative, so we will end up with some positive answers, which we expected. So we go ahead and do that work there. 70 minus 26 gives us 44, and it's negative 44. So this equals negative 44 over negative 32. And we'll reduce that and just divide it by 32. We'll just come up with the decimal form here. 1 3/8. So this is 1 3/8 of a second. So 1 3/8 seconds here. And for the one over here, there's going to be a little bigger number here. So I have to add the two numbers. 70 plus 26 gives me 96. And when I divide by that 32, again, both are negative, so that'll cancel out. Divided by 32 gives me 3 seconds. So 3 seconds on the way down. So there it is. Our two times, 1 3/8 of a second and the 3 seconds. So those are types of problems that you'll end up seeing on tonight's homework. Good luck.